Welcome to this remote meeting of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel, and this will include the instant messaging. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening.
Not me.
No? Okay then, so. I will now explain how the meeting will be conducted this evening. My role as chairman will continue, however the responsibility for managing the meeting has been temporarily assigned to the Democratic and Electoral Services Manager, who I will refer to as the facilitator. This officer will not steer the debate. He will merely assist in implementing the remote meeting protocols. A Democratic Services Officer is with us to produce the minutes and to provide procedural advice as required. I will provide further explanations as we proceed through the agenda, but members are reminded that instant messaging will be visible to those viewing the meeting and must only be used for raising technical issues, indicating a wish to speak, raising a point of order, or seconding a motion. I will now ask the facilitator to take the attendance register by reading out the list of committee members in alphabetical order. Members should confirm their attendance by answering present.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, committee. Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Councillor Brindle.
Present.
Councillor Cox.
Present.
I know we're awaiting Councillor Daly. He's not present at the moment. And we have apologies from Councillor Fissenden. Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Perry.
Present.
Councillor Round.
Present.
And we have Mr. Cooling.
Present.
Thank you. And Mr. Titchener.
Sorry, was that me? Yes, I'm present.
Thank you very much.
I now ask that the facilitator to reads out the list of officers present and which items they are presenting.
Okay, committee, bear with me a moment. There's a number of officers here. So, Patricia Narrabor, Head of Legal Partnership for item 12. Angela Woodhouse, Head of Policy, Communications and Governance for item 13. Rich Clark, Head of Audit Partnership for item 14, along with Jennifer Warrilow, Audit Manager. Mark Green, Director of Finance and Business Improvement for item 17, along with Ellie Dunnett, Head of Finance. Paul Holland, Senior Finance Manager for item 16. John Owen, Finance Manager for item 15. Myself, Ryan O'Connell, the Democratic Electoral Services Manager as Facilitator, and Debbie Snook, Democratic Services Officer as Clerk. We will also have, I'll just see whether they've joined the call, we have Tina James from Grant Thornton. And I can't see that Paul Dossett is on the call, but he may be joining us. Thank you, committee.
Onto the agenda then, item 1, apologies. I now ask that the facilitator reads out any apologies received.
We've received apologies from Councillor Fissenden.
Agenda item 2, substitute members. I now ask the facilitator if there are any substitute members. The facilitator will read out each person from the list and then the substitute member should answer present.
There are none, Chairman.
Perfect. Agenda item 3 then, urgent items. There are no urgent items this evening. Item 4, visiting members. I will now ask the facilitator to read out the list of visiting members.
Just to note that Councillor Daly is in the process of joining the meeting at this point. We have been notified by Councillor English that he wished to speak on items 15, 16 and 17, but at the moment Councillor English isn't present at the meeting. So he may join later, in which case I will make you aware when he does. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers this evening? No. Agenda item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying?
None.
Perfect. Agenda item 7, to consider whether the items be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Agenda item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2020. I'll take them page by page. So page 1, Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Now, in that case, then the minutes will be signed as a correct record at a later date. Agenda item 9, questions and answers from members of the public. There are no questions this evening. Agenda item 10, questions from members. Again, there are no questions this evening. Agenda item 11, the committee work programme. This is on page 10 of the agenda reports pack. Is the committee work programme noted?
Agreed.
Perfect. Agenda item 12. So, agenda item 12 is on page 12, and it is the consultation on the draft model code of conduct report. Over to the head of legal partnership to introduce.
Hello, good evening. Good evening, Madam Chair Lady. Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Thank you very much.
Very clear.
Thank you. Item 12 relates to the consultation on the draft model code of conduct, which has been prepared by the Local Government Association. You will find Appendix 1 Appendix 1 relates to is the model code of conduct itself, and Appendix 2 is the consultation questionnaire. The various concerns have been raised about the effectiveness of the code of conduct, not only in respect of local government but nationally, and this has been reviewed by central government. Paragraph 2 of the report makes reference to the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which reports to central government. The committee released its report on ethical standards in local government in January 2019, and it relates to counties, districts, parishes and town councils as well. The report made a number of recommendations to central government, most of which require further legislation before those recommendations can be implemented. Best practice suggestions were also made as part of the report. The Local Government Draft Model Code of Conduct, Appendix 1, is now being consulted on and seeks to address some of the recommendations and best practice suggestions made by the committee, and these do not require further legislation. Now, some of the matters dealt with in the model code relate to the prohibition of bullying and harassment and incorporates appropriate definitions. It also deals with use of social media, basically a requirement that there be a regular updating of member gifts and hospitality registers and the publication of such registers on the website. It also includes provision for that as part of the code of conduct process that there be access to two independent persons, so possibly a reserve, so that in the event that one becomes unavailable. At the moment we only have one independent person, that the provisions allow for one independent person. It also deals with decision notices relating to formal investigations should be published on the council's website. At the moment, that is not mandatory. Basically, it also goes on to say that parish councils should adopt the code for the principal authority. At the moment, parish councils and town councils can adopt their own code of conduct, the counties or the boroughs, or a mixture. So there's an element of lack of uniformity within the county. In the main, districts do try to follow the county's model code of conduct when adopted, but at the moment there's an element of lack of uniformity. The consultation period runs from 8th of June to 17th of August. and the questionnaire is available. The actual model code and the correspondence from the Local Government Association was circulated to all members and parish councils, and members are able to respond directly. There are various other issues within the model code of conduct that members can refer to if they wish. There's no really major issues in terms of Maidstone Council regarding code of conduct matters at the moment, but the recommendation should be noted. It is to note the contents of the report, and I'm happy to deal with any questions that any members may have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've got two people who have indicated they wish to speak. First up, we've got Councillor Cooling.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear? Yes, okay. I think the main observation is that the LGA document, if it's intended that it's supplanted by a very detailed, tight drafting, then maybe we'll reserve some comments. But compared to the current code of conduct, the Kent model, it is extremely loose and informal. Very loose indeed.
Yeah.
And also the LGA draft, it's got some text in square brackets. And if that text were accepted, i.e. the brackets removed, there's quite an intrusion into private life. Now, it's a matter of judgment where private life starts and stops. But I think this model, and I believe that Maidstone Calc will be, it may have already written to its members. We do have, from a parish council perspective, not Maidstone necessarily, we have a concern about this draft, that it's, if anything, a backward step. It does moot sanctions, and given that this committee generally hears about problems in parish councils rather than at borough level, then I think the parishes would welcome a degree of sanctions being defined, so that as necessary parish councillor misbehaviour could be addressed. But as it stands, I for one, and this came up at the last Maidstone Calc meeting, I for one do not think the LGA draft is very good at all. That is my view.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to sanctions, the Localism Act 2011 prescribes the types of sanctions that can be imposed at the moment. So this particular draft model cannot go beyond that. For example, members cannot be suspended because that would be going beyond the requirements of legislation. So it needs further legislation to kind of widen or impose more rigorous sanctions. In relation to perhaps the provisions regarding councillors acting in the cause of their role as councillors, and perhaps the terms regarding it, maybe they flesh that out a bit, and there is an element of, well, is there more scope for matters being conducted in a private capacity being incorporated in the role of a councillor? But those are the observations that members should forward to the LGA. That's the purpose of the consultation. So those views should be expressed and outlined by the parish councils to the LGA. Each local authority, both parish and local, district rather, has its own peculiar issues that it may be dealing with. So I think those observations should be forwarded directly to the LGA. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clune, do you want to come back again?
Yes, if I may, so please ignore my latest instant message, but thank you very much indeed. Am I the only one who sees the LGA draft, if that is basically the more or less the be all and end all of it, subject to consultation, its whole style, its tightness, am I the only one that feels that it's a backward step in terms of defining a code of conduct? It attempts to be chatty, informal, etc., and I think it misses the point. But obviously that is down to the parish council or individual parish councils to make their views felt. But I think I'm disappointed by the LGA draft. The Kent model, which I think the majority of parish councils have followed, it has a far more rigorous definition. Yes, it could benefit from a bit more sanctions within the law, current law, I agree. But I do not view this LGA draft as impressive at all.
Thank you. Next on the list, I've got Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Mrs. Narrable's just said, Councillor Cooling can complete the questionnaire and express his views there. I do wonder, though, I'm looking at it, question 17, I haven't actually looked at it online yet, but I wonder if there's enough space on there to make all the comments that he needs to make. I mean, some of these things are finite and they allow you 1,000 characters. So can someone let me know if that is a finite field or if it's infinite? Because I don't know. I mean, this report's for noting only, but I've spotted one or two things which I think are a bit sloppy, as pretty much as Councillor Cooling was saying. I mean, for example, on our page 20, the first main paragraph, it says something about unreasonable or excessive personal attack. I don't think there should be any personal attack whatsoever. So I would have that phrase deleted in its entirety. And then there's, I mean, I won't go into all the other sloppy bits because I'll put those, my answers to that in the questionnaire, but there are quite a few sloppy things here. So I do think it's important that all members of all committees do respond to this questionnaire so that the LGA can see that we're not particularly happy with it, and it is also important that standards are maintained. So I think everyone should make sure that they do actually complete the questionnaire. Thank you, Chair.
Can I say something, Madam Chairman? Can you hear me? Peter, can you hear me?
Peter, I can hear you.
Yeah,
I can hear him.
I can hear you.
I just want. Can I just say something? I didn't have my name down for anything, but I agree with what Peter's saying. What concerns me is if parish councils report individually, it's going to create even more of a muddle than if it's coordinated. I would rather the parish councils all got the same revised draft to say yes or no to, rather than individually coming back with their own ideas, which will just confuse everybody, I think.
If I may add to that, Peter, I think that we have a role within Maidstone Calc to encourage parishes to join in a coordinated response. So I think it's a fair point. Sorry to interrupt.
I don't know if Councillor Harvey can actually respond. Are you back?
I'm back, yes.
You are, excellent. Do you want to carry on? Because I was going to step in because I didn't know whether you could hear.
Yes, so next on the list I had Councillor Perry.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, this is for noting, and I accept that, but my feeling is exactly the same almost as Councillor Cooling has just said, and I agree with the Calc position on this. When I read it, I thought it was a rather slack document. I'm trying to think of a suitable wording for it, but it seemed to be, in fact, I was a bit surprised when I read it because it read so easily, and I thought, well, these sort of documents shouldn't read easily at all. And there are areas in it which I've, for instance, the confidentiality in access to information, which is an important area, and we all know that. We all had our own disputes on it, I think. But it talks about acquired by me, which I believe is of a confidential nature. Well, belief, that's not quite the sort of wording I'd want to see in this sort of document. And then the whole area of distribute, I think, is so woolly. I think needs a lot more tightening up, because quite frankly, when I read it, I thought, well, what do you really mean? It's so subjective the way it's drafted. So there's a lot of fault in here. And the question, I mean, I think all councillors, if they can, should respond, obviously. I think Calc does have a major position on this, actually. And I think as a group of parishes, and Calc represents 40 odd parishes in the borough, that's a very important position. And I think that needs to be respected as well. So I'm not very happy with this. I think it's a rather slack and rather badly drafted document. That's my personal view, and I think we should say so, quite frankly. But it's for noting at the moment. I understand that.
Thank you. Next on my list, I've got Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. It sounds that there is potential here to ask Calc, as one of the Peter duo has said, that we could sort of coordinate the responses from the parishes to have a bit more impact. I think that would be the best way to possibly approach that. But also, I think if all of the councillors are going off, I wonder if we shouldn't coordinate responses from the councillors as well, because you might have tweaks that would make two similar things and make the point better with one. I'm glad to hear Councillor Perry bring up what he did, because I think all of this needs to have the teeth. If you have a code of conduct, it's almost pointless having one if it has no teeth to not reprimand, but to actually enforce the document itself, or else people will just disregard it. And I think it's important when our legal team are making the decisions whether to release a document or not, to know that they have the ability to reprimand or to enforce their decision. And I think without that, it's becoming wishy-washy. And I hear what you say about the existing Kent document. Was that an adaptation of a document that came before? In other words, can we let this document come through from the LGA with everybody's representations and then say, however, we would like our document in Kent to be robust in X way? I wasn't around when they did the other one. Can anybody enlighten me?
Can I, Madam Chair, can I come in there, please?
Yeah, of course.
So the process will be the LGA will consider the consultation responses, and once they finalise this model code, it's not mandatory, but usually what happens is because the districts model their code on Kent's, so Kent will have to review it. We did have a discussion within the Kent secretaries, i.e. the monitoring officers group within Kent, and on the previous occasion, Kent reviewed its code and the model was worked on with some monitoring officers within Kent. The model code was the Kent-wide code, the county code was created, and then the districts modelled their own code on the Kent code so that there's an element of uniformity, and that will be the process. A similar process will be followed to ensure that at least there's an element of uniformity within within the county. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, is there anything you want to come back on that?
No, it sounds like we have a belt and braces approach and a couple of staples that we might be able to add later. So it sounds encouraging, but I think it would be good to have some sort of strategic approach, certainly from Calc, because I think it would have more power and more weight behind the response.
Thank you. Councillor Brindle, you've also asked to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a little concern about the timescale for this. I note on page 14 that the closing date for comments is the 17th of August, and I just wonder whether whether we've enough time to actually do this. I'm just concerned that there isn't enough time. Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, do you want to come in now?
Yes, thank you very much for that, Councillor Brindle. A draft letter to the Maidstone Calc members is with Geraldine Brown, our chair, and before this meeting I put a chase in to see if it goes out. I agree with you absolutely that time is extremely tight, but I do think it behooves us to actually, as I think Martin said, to actually get views in from the parishes. And by the way, the Kent model, as I understand it, I may sit here being corrected, but I wasn't aware that it was distilled from a national initiative all those years ago. I think there was a vacuum, and the Kent model I thought was pretty darn good. No doubt it's been tweaked a bit around Kent, but it was a darn good one. And to say again, the LGA current draft is a retrograde step. Yes, as Martin said, a few staples can be put in, be excellent, but we're going backwards if we're not careful.
Thank you. Councillor Brindle, do you want to come back?
Yes, please. I still have major concerns about the timescale. Is there any chance for an extension? I'll tell you for why. Boxley Parish Council don't meet in August. I think this is something that should be discussed at a full council meeting, that is parish council meeting, and I'm not certain that we're alone in this. I'm sure a lot of other parish councils don't meet during the holiday season, whatever holidays we're allowed to have at this time. But I do still have major concerns. Thank you.
May I?
Yes, go for it.
If I may, Councillor Brindle, absolutely. I will, others may take away an action, but I will speak to Geraldine Brown tomorrow to endeavour to get through CALC, i.e. the whole Kent Association, a plea that the 17th of August is extended by, I'm making this up, at least a month. Your point is very fair.
Can I just add to that? When because the model code was proposed to be consulted upon just before lockdown started, and we did make representations. That's the monitoring officers within Kent. Some of us made representations requiring that the consultation be delayed until later on in the year. But I think maybe some authorities are having issues, so the LGA elected to start the consultation now. But the view has been expressed that whilst we are working remotely and in these peculiar times that we are working in, it really isn't appropriate because we're all very engaged with COVID related matters, but the LGA has elected to start the consultation now. So I just wanted the committee to know that we have made representations.
Can we make it again, Patricia, if that's possible? Because we may have lost the letter. It has happened before, not from us, but when it gets to government, it just seems to get lost somewhere. And I'm sure the LGA may be similar. But if you could put another email out just saying, we see this, we're getting feedback from parishes. Can we please push for an extension? I think it would be a very worthwhile 5-10 minute email. Thank you.
I can definitely do that, but I think as many quarters as can send representations, that the deadline be extended, I think will add more voice onto the issue. So I definitely will send an email, but I think if Cal can send representations on behalf of the parishes, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no one left who wishes to speak. Before we agree the item, is anyone else who wishes to say anything?
Yes, Madam Chairman, can I say something very quickly?
Yes, let's go.
Peter Tishner here. I just want to say I support the delay. I mean, Alcombe Parish Council, we're a small council, but we're not meeting till the end of August, if at all. So September or October would be even better.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? No. In that case, then we turn to the recommendation on page 12, and the committee is asked to note this report. Committee members, is that noted?
Noted.
Noted.
Perfect. Moving on then to agenda item 12, which is the annual governance statement 1920 and the updated local code of corporate governance. This is on page 43 of the agenda report pack. I call upon Angela Woodhouse, Head of Policy Communications and Governance, to introduce her report.
Thank you, Chairman. The annual governance statement is a review of the Council's governance arrangements for the last financial year. The statement provides an evaluation of how we meet the governance framework and provides an opinion on whether the current governance arrangements are fit for purpose. Overall, I can confirm that the Council's governance arrangements are sound and working well. We have identified managing the financial risk from the impact of COVID-19 in the action plan for this year, as we believe this will have a significant impact on the Council and potentially the governance arrangements, and it's also included on the corporate risk register. Other actions that are considered high risk in our corporate risk register that are also included are the management of the Council's contracts, short-term Brexit impact and the capacity to deliver our regeneration programme. I can report that progress was made against last year's action plan as set out at 2.5 of the report, with a number of those actions now closed for the purposes of improvement in 2020 to 21. As I was bringing this report, I took the opportunity to review and refresh the local code of corporate governance, which was last fully updated in 2017. The changes include minor amendments to update the code, a longer introduction and an explanation of how we review and report on our governance arrangements. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee on the annual governance statement or the refreshed code of corporate governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So far I've got Peter Cooling who wishes to speak. Councillor Cooling, over to you.
A very quick one, and thank you very much, Angela. On page 45, right at the bottom, key improvement area, and maybe this is one that you'll refer to, Mark, I'm not certain. It does say ensure financial risk arising from the impact of COVID-19 are managed with a 1st of March 2021 date. That feels a little bit uncomfortable. Surely we should be having a path through which is far quicker than 9 months off.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to put in a date of, so the others, we report back to you every 6 months on how this action plan is going. So I'm quite happy to include a date of September. What I will say is in the paragraph, well, actually in the annual governance statement itself, when we speak about this, we do mention the fact that it's actually reported on monthly. It's being reported on regularly. There's a lot of action being taken. It goes to policy and resources, and they're really on top of the brief. But I'm more than happy to add in a date in there to show how important it is. But yeah, you're right, it's critical. So fair comment.
Thank you. Councillor Clean, do you want to come back on that at all?
No, that's very satisfactory. Thank you very much.
Councillor Atkinson, you've also indicated to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 48, which I'm just trying to find now, here we go. Yeah, the Lock Meadow thing. Now, we gave Planning Commission last week for the first phase of this. I understand that funds will be available for that, but it's only phase 1. So I hope that there'll be funds available for phase 2 and that it won't be delayed by COVID-19. So that's the first point. Then in the actual statements on, for example, pages 60 and 70, there's abbreviations and acronyms which aren't actually explained. So I think every time an abbreviation or an acronym is used, the first time it's used, it should be explained in full as to what it means. So I'd like to see that amended. Then on page 89, we've used the word regularly. Now, once every 20 years is regularly. It doesn't actually mean anything. So I'd like to suggest that maybe, I think I said it's on page 89, the very last word in the managing risk bit, regularly. So I'd like to see that changed to something like twice a year. So hopefully the committee will agree with that change to make it more specific. Thank you very much.
Does anyone want to come back and comment on that?
Chair, I'm happy to come back on the comment about Lock Meadow.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, you're right, Councillor Atkinson, that the work that's going on at the moment is phase one of a series of improvements that potentially we could make to Loch Meadow. We're reviewing the capital programme this autumn, and subsequent phases will be considered as part of that. Clearly, we are in a difficult situation, and we need to weigh up opportunities like this with other ones that the council may have. So I can't promise you that there will be further investment, but there's certainly the investment that Planning Committee gave approval to last week, and also investment that the council's supporting by Odeon to refurbish the cinema.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Atkinson raised a point about the use of the word regularly and changing it to twice a year. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Chairman, can I say something, because I'm a very late arrival, but I do apologise for that, but I had terrible problems with my machinery. But I'd like to not only agree with what Councillor Atkinson has said, this business of regularly, and every 20 years it might be regular, but it ain't regular enough. And I would quite agree with Keith on this, and in fact like to second this altogether, this whole business. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Daly. Councillor Atkinson, is there anything you want to come back on for that? Or have all your questions been answered?
They've been answered. Thanks very much, Chair.
Councillor Brindle, are you there?
Yes, sorry, my finger slipped. I was trying to unmute myself, failing miserably. You talked, Councillor Atkinson, about on page 48, Loch Meadow. You will remember that we've also passed the Len House development, and there is an element of that which may cause concern. That is the or daylighting of the River Len. Now, that has potential to be quite costly, and I just wondered whether that has or will be taken into account when we look at this capacity to deliver on our investment, given that that parcel of land where the culvert is closed will be ceded over to NBC within, I think, 6 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, that particular thing about Len, we're £80,000 from the developer on that, so that'll go at least some of the way to laying our expenses. Yeah, I've got my point about abbreviations and acronyms. Hopefully that will be addressed so that they're explained in full the first time they appear. Thank you.
Mrs. Woodhouse, are you happy to take that on board? An update?
Yeah, and I apologise for that. I normally pick those up, so yeah, I'll take that on board and make sure they're amended. It's a fair point. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item?
On this agenda item?
Yes.
Yes, I do have one more point, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. At the bottom of page 46, it's promoting decision making on garden communities, etc., etc., etc. 1st of March 2021. I would have thought, given that the thoughts on call for sites which are going to go forward, which garden community opportunities may go forward, will be coming out sometime in September. I would have thought that this 1st of March 2021 is far too late to build confidence that this subject is being handled in what shall I call it, an open way. So I appeal for that 1st of March 2021 to be drawn right forward to sometime late September or October, please.
Noted. I can make that change, no problem.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this item? No, in that case, then we turn to the recommendation, which is on page 43, and we're asked to approve the annual governance statement for 1920 and the refreshed local code of corporate governance. Is there anyone willing to propose this item?
I'll propose it, but as amended by my minor alteration regularly.
Seconded, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you. Members, are you all happy to take Keith's update just within this item as a whole?
Agreed.
Agreed, perfect.
Agreed.
Right, in that case then, members, do you want to go to a vote on this, or are you all happy just to agree the two items?
Agree, Sir Chairman.
Agreed. I agree with the changes.
Agree with changes.
Perfect. In that case, then we will move on to agenda item 14. This is on page 94 of the reports pack. This report is the annual internal audit report and opinion 1920. I call upon Rich Clark, Head of Audit Partnership, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I assume my microphone is working well, or people would tell me soon enough if it wasn't.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, we can hear you.
Great. I'll direct members to the substantive part of the report, which starts at page 100 of the pack, with a couple of things that my audit standards oblige me to say out loud in these sorts of meetings, which is that I'm pleased to confirm that the report you have in front of you has been prepared with requisite independence and objectivity and free from undue influence from officers and members. As I always say, it's easy to overlook that, but it is an important part of the sorts of assurance that we can give you and to senior officers within the council. And I'm grateful for the support of members and this committee in ensuring our independence and safeguarding. On page 101 of the pack, I'll go into a little detail about how the COVID-19 emergency has particularly affected the work that we did in audit. And these couple of pages build on a memo that I originally circulated to the Chair and Vice Chair back in May when we were planning these sorts of developments. Members can see for themselves the sorts of changes that we had to make to expedite a conclusion to our 1920 work. And I'm very pleased to say that we've been able to complete that plan in full, which was perhaps a little touch and go when I first circulated the memo in May, but I'm pleased with how well the team have come together to deliver the plan. Obviously, the risk landscape has changed significantly since the audit plan that members agreed back in the middle of March. And as I say at the bottom of page 102, we are currently working on those revised risks with a review to bring in a revised plan to members in September, which would have been on the work programme you saw earlier. Page 103 and 4 is the head of internal audit opinion itself. And having been able to complete the programme as set out, I'm pleased to confirm, as was in Mr. Woodhouse item a few moments ago, that I'm giving an unqualified opinion on the council's internal control, governance and risk management, and that I have no other matters to report to you as part of that opinion. From page 106 onwards, it goes into the extent and nature of detailed work that goes to underpin that opinion, including, say, page 107 and on to 108, the individual audit engagement that we've completed throughout the year that have helped me to form the conclusion that's on page 103. We have the executive summaries of those from page 110 to a few pages afterwards. There's nothing from that I particularly like to draw to your conclusion, except to say that there are two weak assurance rated reports listed in the past 12 months or so, one on planning enforcement, one on health and safety. Those are ones that we would intend to bring to the committee in further detail once we've been able to restart our follow-up programme. So this is potentially something that we will discuss for the September or November meeting of the committee to give you some detail and feedback on what's happened since we issued those reports earlier in the year. The next section that I'd bring to your attention is the follow-up of actions on page 117. It's an important part of the work that we do, that we raise recommendations for improvement, which are turned into agreed actions with consent of officers. and we raised and followed up around 120 of those across the council over the year. Our follow-up programme for the last couple of months been suspended to focus on the 1920 work, but that's recently restarted, and so I'll be able to have an update for members later in the year on those actions which have fallen due in the past few months. But certainly looking at progress up to the 31st of March, I was quite happy with the progress that officers were making in order to address the actions that we had raised. Page 118 and onwards goes into some of our wider work in corporate governance, including those instances where we're involved in investigations or looking into matters of counter fraud, including our work on the National Fraud Initiative. Members will see a separate update on risk management, so we mentioned it briefly here to complete the picture of what we do as an audit service and conclude with some of the consultative and other engagements that we've undertaken here on page 120 and 121. The final substantive section of this report is about the audit service itself. It's an important part of the assurance that we give to you is that some comfort that we are conformed to the professional standards of internal audit. And this year, happily, you don't just have to take my word for it. This was the 5th year of a 5-year cycle. So as members will know, we commissioned an external quality assessment, which was won on a competitive procurement by SIPSA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting. Ray Gard, who was our assessor, presented for the last audit committee to members, so we could run through his findings before detail. I've summarised on page 122, and the full report is a further appendix. But the headline is that it's reported that we continue to fully conform with the public sector internal audit standards and associated guidance, which I believe, based on the research I've done, makes us the only audit service to have received those kind of top marks from both the Institute of Internal Audit and from SIPSA. So I'm proud of that accomplishment and like to give my thanks to my team for being able to make that statement to you this evening. Part of that support for the team, the final section of the report I'll highlight, is the training and qualifications. It's something that we're very keen on pursuing as a service and encouraging everyone in the team to develop. A couple that I'll highlight in particular is Louise Taylor, who joined us initially as a trainee and now serves with us as a qualified chartered certified internal auditor. Mark Goodwin, who completed his qualification to become an accredited counter fraud specialist. And if I may put a little word in for myself, at the time of writing, I had a final interview stage on the 21st of July to become a full chartered member of the Institute of Internal Audit. I learned just 24 hours ago that I passed that, so I am now a full member of the Chartered Institute of Internal Audit, along with the qualification. So I didn't mean to end on blowing my own trumpet, but nevertheless, that's the last section that I want to highlight, particularly from this report. And I'm happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, and congratulations on your achievement. I've got quite a few people who've asked to speak. So from the top, Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, first of all, Rich, congratulations, well deserved. And we're very lucky here to have such a good internal audit team. I think it's something I think we all benefit from, and it's a very important function. So and I was also glad to see you've got an unqualified opinion on the internal controls, governance and risk management, which I think is very, very important. So I think it's really, really good. Just a couple of points. On page 101, when you're talking about the audit plan, you talk about a disrupted year with vacancies and secondments. As a little bit, I'd just like you to elaborate just a bit on that. And the other point, and it's one that comes up time and time again, and I know I've banged the drum on this, and a few of us have. On page 107, the planning enforcement you give is weak. Now, that does something I think we worry about all the time, and I would quite like you to elaborate a little bit more on that, and A, what you intend to do, and B, how we can resolve this, because it seems to me this is such an important issue, and the sort of in the planning world, I think the credibility of the authority itself comes into question if we can't enforce conditions and infringements. These are very important observations, and obviously with the weight of internal audit behind, that's another factor in all this. But I would appreciate your views on those points. Now, thank you again, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Thank you, Chair. To start with, on the vacancies and to comment, there is later on in the report, and was referenced in the interim period, is that members may be aware that Russell Heppelston is the Deputy Head of Audit Partnership, served in a seconded role as Head of Audit for Dartford and Sevenoaks for very nearly 18 months, from the summer of 2018 through to January of 2020. In the course of that position at Dartford and Sevenoaks, he was tasked with reconstructing the entire audit team. And in the course of that reconstruction, he recruited 2 of our staff, who I'm pleased that they were able to seek and achieve promotions. But they moved over to work in Dartford and Sevenoaks, and we've since recruited to fill the gap, largely internally, which I think is always a bonus. With respect to the planning enforcement work, as I said at the time, this is something that we're looking to follow up in more detail when it comes to our reporting in September. Members will have had the executive summary of that report back in November, and it might be useful perhaps if I circulated that executive summary again, or even the full report, so members could see the details, perhaps along with a short note about what's been done to address the issues since they were arisen. If members would like to do that before we get to see it in September, that's something I'm happy to circulate separately.
I would appreciate that personally, Rich. That'd be very helpful. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Rich, I just wanted to say, and I'm glad you've noted it in here because I think it is quite key. Your staff were distributed around the hub quite notably, and the work that was done. And I see there you've given a figure of 300 man hours, or certainly days, I would have thought, really, that is. So thank you for that. It was very reassuring to know that a department that would watch every T that was crossed and I that was dotted was going to be important when we were dealing with 5,500 people that the government gave us to check out. So a thank you for that. Also very encouraged by the amount, and I'm glad you picked it out because I was going to bring it out about the training. You're very right to blow your own trumpet. Because sometimes people won't blow it for you. But I do think it's encouraging, and very encouraged to see that we have apprenticeships going on, which is very key. Always encouraged to see that. I can see what Councillor Perry was going to pick up with the planning enforcement, but I did speak to that department midway, or rather as we were starting to come out, rather sort of a late June, and I believe a lot of it was they weren't able to go to people's houses, they weren't able to go onto sites, but people were at home, and they were looking over various garden walls and seeing things that were coming forward. So I think a lot has been raised in that department, and people have started to pick up things that need to be checked. But I think we might find COVID is responsible for restricting people's movements to go onto site. So it may be lacking in that. But let's see what your report comes out with. But thank you for the very concise report. Well, not concise, it goes on. But thank you for your report. It's very encouraging, and well done to all members for their achievements with their learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Thank you. Next up, we've got Councillor Atkinson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to say what Councillor Perry said about planning enforcement, because being on the planning committee with him, we both know how important this is. So I'm pleased that it's being looked at. I also tried to congratulate Rich and his team on their exam achievements, but IM didn't seem to like my comment for some reason, so I'm doing it verbally instead. So well done, everyone. Now, I'd like to just say one or two things about Yeah, there's various mentions in here about the collaboration agreement, the four-way collaboration agreement, which was allowed to expire sometime last year, and the target date for getting it sorted out isn't until the 31st of December this year. Now, first of all, how was it allowed to expire in the first place? And secondly, why is it taking so long to renew it? So that's the first point. Then on page 113, paragraph 61, I've always been concerned about the fire drill procedure in the town hall. I mean, basically, it relies on someone like Debbie Snook going out of the chamber, going downstairs to see if it's safe, and then coming back to an inferno to tell us, oh, yes, councillors, you can come out this way. Oh, by the way, though, the way is now blocked. I mean, in any normal fire drill, you have a set place to meet and you all file out in an orderly fashion straight away. You don't wait for someone to try to find a way out. So, I really do think our fire drill should be updated. I know it's not particularly relevant right now, but when we do get back to the town hall, I do think that would be a useful thing to do. And then paragraph 62, the level of completion of these health and safety training modules, that's a bit worrying, especially senior officers. They should be doing that themselves, setting an example. And finally, page 117 and various other places, but we've got these things, these graphs, I was trying to say, and it says in green, amber and red. Well, it's like the old thing on the television, for those of you watching in black and white, the pink's behind the yellow, whatever it was. But I'd also say that it actually says at the foot of each bar, it's actually at the left, and then where it says at the foot at the top, it's actually on the right, so something needs to be changed. It's only a minor thing. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. So thank you, Chair.
Mr. Clark, able to come back on the relevant points, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Atkinson. Dealing in the reverse order. You're right on the graphs, and I'm always constantly aware that not everybody sees or gets these things in colour, and red and green particularly are an issue for some people, which is why I've gone through the colours and why what you may see is the legacy of a previous design where the graph may have been oriented slightly differently, but to keep it on a page, it moved into a landscape design. Hopefully, it's still apparent to members by the foot of the bar, I mean the bit closest to the axis and so on. So hopefully that was clear to members. With respect to your points on the health and safety audit, I mean, I agree with you on the completion of the mandatory modules, and I'd certainly say that there is an element of that where we would look to the more senior people in the organisation to set an example in terms of completing those, which is why the testing that we did seek to stratify by grade the levels of completion. And the finding wasn't what the council would want it to be, and that's why we've reported it, and that's why we've got an action that seeks to improve that performance. And certainly, as I said in the report, it's something that we'll look to bring back to members early in the autumn to provide some assurance on how those actions have been addressed. And finally, your point on the collaboration agreement, it's not something that's in my gift, obviously. I'm not free to write the rules about how the authorities collaborate with one another. I can assure members, though, that there is two things I can assure members over. Firstly, that there exists a draft replacement collaboration agreement, which is currently being considered. And so I hope that we will not, in fact, have to wait until December of 2020 to see a new agreement signed. But secondly, all four authorities do continue to affirm their commitment to the partnership, even in a time where authorities are looking to make savings because of COVID-19 and other reasons. I am reassured by officers and members across the four authorities that their commitment to the continuation of the audit partnership remains strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, is there anything you want to come back on? Councillor Atkinson?
No, sorry, I was trying to switch the mic back on. No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list, I've got Councillor Cooling.
Thank you very much. On page 101, right at the top, it says that, and while I applaud that Rich and his team played their part in the hub, it's slightly concerning that it says this essentially recognised audit as a back office function. That's almost dismissive, because I would have thought during the COVID-19 situation, I would have thought certain risks were far greater than they normally are. So if Rich is comfortable that he was able to deploy on the various issues, fair enough. But I find it slightly alarming if risk goes up, resource to manage the risk goes down. First comment. And over the page on 102, the 2020-21 plan, which I believe we're going to see later this year, I'm hoping that Richard will include a review of the amended procedures and whether they were logged and tracked and checked, or when are they going to be repealed. And secondly, remote contract management. Did any contract management suffer as a result? Thirdly, presumably your internal audit work program, you will review relative priorities in light of what we're going through and have gone through. And fourthly, and I think critically, I would have thought the borough would want a review of all aspects of home working. And by that I mean its effectiveness, operational effectiveness, the diligent discharge of duties, and please don't read anything into that, and additional risks and value for money. So my final two comments, if I may. Firstly, on page 110, paragraph 46, and I think that Keith Atkinson may have beaten me to this if at some point, but it refers to policies relating to use of credit cards being generally followed and largely positive results. Those two words in that paragraph, when it comes to spending capability with credit cards, is a bit worrying. And my final point, Rich, and is slightly facetious, but page 142, Appendix A, where you give the summary of survey results, I notice on the number 3, internal audit is valued throughout the organisation. I'm not certain what N-A refers to in this case, but there's one person noted in there. Question, is there some special significance to the N-A I don't recognise, or is that person being shot? Thank you.
Mr. Clark, are you able to respond to some of those points?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the point about the going to your first point, Councillor Cooling, on the audit as being a back office service. I mean, I don't know the extent to which sort of members are familiar with the notion of 3 lines of defence and internal audit being in the 3rd line. So having an important role to play, undoubtedly, and you'd expect me to say that, but having a role which lies behind 2 further lines of defence. Certainly, I mean, Councillor Cox is right to highlight the work that we did distributing aid to vulnerable people across the borough, and situationally, right at that moment in time, I'm quite comfortable with the authority seeing that as a greater priority than completing the audit work. But you are right to say that when the risks go up, there is still a need for audit work. And so I can reassure members that there was never a point during this process where the internal audit service was completely vacated. There was always people remaining within the audit service, myself included, who were able to offer advice, to offer oversight, offer commentary on the risk. And so internal audit service remained and was able to continue offering that kind of advice and support and scrutiny, even when the majority of the staff was seconded to things which, in the moment at the time, I was quite happy with them being greater priorities for Maidstone and the other parties, the other partner authorities, to be able to deliver support to their residents and their businesses. Your points on the 2021 plan are well made as also. There was a sort of a further note that I think was forwarded to the committee with some early thoughts about how that plan might adapt. With respect to amended procedures, these are very much something that we would expect to encounter as we complete our work programme going around the authority. And certainly we've already briefed audit staff to be on the lookout for amended procedures, to the extent that we may well see the plan in even more of a state of change as the year progresses. If an auditor goes into an area and sees that the changed procedures during COVID are sufficiently diverse from the usual procedures that we are effectively looking at two processes, we might split those into two audits and potentially give two different assurance views on those different periods of the year if the process we encounter is sufficiently different. I should say, sat here right now, I'm not aware of any areas of the council that did diversify their controls to that degree that we would consider it to be a wholly separate area. But these are things that we have an audit program that's designed to learn. Similarly, with remote contract management, again, we would look at how those processes functions during the COVID-19 period and remote working, which of course continue, and potentially look at those as a separate piece of work. On the home working point that you raised, we do have notionally a piece of work on the plan that we're kicking around at the moment that's primarily looking at the technicalities around it, the remote access, and making sure that's well governed. But you're quite right to say that there are major cultural and well-being and staff management issues around remote working too, which is why primarily, well, first off the blocks at Ashford, who are making some or seeking to make some quite significant changes in this regard, we're looking to pilot a piece of work looking at home working precisely in the kind of broad way that Councillor Cooling indicates. Do that work first at Ashford and bring it back to Maidstone, depending on what we've learned from that process and depending on how Maidstone's own plans in that regard today. With respect to the generally and largely comments with respect to corporate credit cards, I'm indebted to Jen Warrilow, audit manager, who's been able to look at the report while we're talking here. And the detail of it is we tested 10 corporate credit card holders and found one instance where the form had not been completed or retained, but we were able on further investigation to verify the spending as accurate. We also raised an action about credit limit, and we recommended that the credit limits are periodically reviewed to ensure that they're appropriate. And we found 3 issues, 3 out of 25 in the sample, where we couldn't immediately lay our hands on the receipt for those payments, but we were able to gain assurance via other means that the payments were legitimate. So there are some issues around retention of documentation, but we didn't find any issues around the legitimacy of payment. And finally, on the survey, the not applicable for audit is important across the organisation. I think was the question that came up as not applicable. Members who completed the survey back in January or February might recall that people were given the option of agree, partially agree, or to mark it as non-applicable, and someone decided to mark it as non-applicable. They didn't fill in the comment box, so their reasons remain a mystery to me. But those are the results as we received. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Councillor Clocks, I believe you want to come in on home working?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to make the this committee aware that we have a politically balanced COVID recovery group that has brought up home working as something we would like to hear back from Ms. Georgia Hawkes, who has been overseeing this, and we raised some issues regarding proper desks, chairs, etc., so that we don't look into the future and then see people with ailments that we haven't picked up on. So it is something that's definitely on our radar. Glad to hear that we're going to be doing something with Ashford, and wholeheartedly let's learn some best practice as well. But obviously this isn't rushing away quickly. During COVID, we had 8 people in Maidstone House, where we normally would have 200, I think, and 25. And we have now got various parts of the offices that are workable, but we have, I believe it's something like 30% at any one time, if that, that are coming back into work. But yes, mental health issues are being taken note of, and are very important to us. And I think the preparation pre-Brexit, where we were doing the trials, did enable us to have a very robust IT switch over to home working. And I know that certainly as members, we would like to thank the IT department for nurturing us through the ability to do remote meetings. Not something that was easy. I'm sure many people have stories they'll dine out on, but it is something that we have been able to come up with. We will be moving towards Teams for more efficiency as well into the near future. Just also to pick up on the comments with the credit cards and uses of the corporate credit card, they were very used during the COVID hub for delivery of food, because one of the first things that we experienced right at the beginning was the ability to actually get food from wholesalers. It was almost impossible. So we found ourselves going to almost larger supermarkets, and in one case, right at the beginning, I had to go and ask a manager whether we could have 100 packs of 9 toilet rolls, and can I not take them out the front door, please, because I would be mugged. But no, the use of credit cards has been marvelous to be able to have that, because we wouldn't have been able to have done the food purchasing for the food donation, for the food parcels going out. So I'm sure that is something that will decrease, and the amount of spending won't come down. I wish there were air miles on the amount that was spent, but I'm sure that that doesn't happen. But thank you, and just allow him to comment on those two things. Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, do you want to come back on the points that you raised initially?
Only very quickly, and it obviously is very important to look at the working environment for those who are doing their duty at home. Very important. I hesitate to say it, but I'm sure that any internal audit review of the situation will also look at the, how does one put it, the diligence that is applied by those who are home working. And I wouldn't wish to introduce the concept of any abuse of the system going on, but I would have thought there ought to be a review of how home working is conducted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Round, you've also indicated you want to speak.
Yes, please. Councillor Perry alluded to one of my prime points, but on the basis that planning enforcement is something I'm glad to see that you will be following up on, Rich. Can I also ask you to note that you also say that there is another area of problem, and that is planning discharge conditions, page 115. I assume that you'll be coming back in the same respect as you will be on the planning enforcement issues in that respect, because planning discharges remain a severe problem. There are so many conditions out there that are not being conformed to and not being followed up, and they amount to hundreds, if not thousands of pounds worth of issues, right down to somebody's small house to major infrastructure. So that's a key area. That's one point which I'm fairly sure you'll follow up on. But the other one I wanted to get back on was, whilst I noticed that fixed penalty notices for waste crime are being issued, and that there are a number of unpaid FPNs for some waste crimes are not routinely prosecuted. I assume you're going to follow up on that, but I would like to assume also, I'm making too many assumptions perhaps, but I'm going back to civil parking enforcement, page 111. I am aware that there's an enormous amount of people who do not pay those fines, as well as do not pay fly tipping fines. I would like to be assured that there is some follow-up on that. Thank you, Rich.
Mr. Clark, happy to come back on those points?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The planning discharge conditions and the waste crime are pieces of work we reviewed late in the year. They don't have an assurance rating like the others do, as you will have seen, but we still have raised findings. We still have raised recommendations in those areas. The Councillor Round's quite right that those are things that we will follow up as the year continues. And so those reports are still quite fresh, so I won't have an update just yet. But I'm happy to include that information in future follow-up reports for this committee as we get round to looking at those implemented recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, may I congratulate you, Rich, again on your achievement of now being a certified member of an institution. I think that's probably the right way. But congratulations to you, because I know how much hard work there is doing that to get to those achievements, and you're doing that whilst you're also working. Can I just say this? I think almost all the points that needed to be picked up have been picked up. But the way in which meetings are being held at the moment are only possible because of the way in which IT has progressed to provide these kinds of virtual meetings. If it hadn't been for that, I have not the slightest idea where we would be now. We would be really in trouble. But I understand all the way in which you work, Rich, and that every year I have this wonderful opportunity to say thank you to staff who provide these reports, which are very, very detailed. And I would have expected perhaps this year that you might have had to have cut back on it because of the way in which you produced them. I mean, home working is not the easiest thing to do, and particularly you talk about a backroom service. Although I understand the term, you've nevertheless needed to get into and able to get into all the queries that you've made during your work, and that can't be easy when everybody's remote and not just generally available in the office to be able to sit by and to talk to. So that's that. So all I say is this: if you can do this in these circumstances and still produce all this amount of paper, perhaps it would have been better to have an HGV next time round. But anyway, can I just say this? I've been in virtual meetings since the 13th of March, I think, and a lot of meetings have been cancelled. Quite a number of meetings have been cancelled. I don't believe that service has suffered. I know perfectly well that the majority of things that we deliver have been delivered, but I think the offices have been dealt with in a different way from the way any of us. And in 70 years of working in commerce, I have never known a time like this. And what on earth has caused it, really, I don't know, because it's something that we're not being told, I believe. But just say this, that really all the amounts of work that we've got on our plate now are going to be dealt with in a different way. There's no doubt about it going forward. We will perhaps maintain some of the way in which we are working at the moment virtually, but quite a lot depends on the interaction of committees and working together and coming together to meet. I think that's a very important part of the whole thing. So well done for all those who've done what they've done now, because I would have not been surprised had it been said somewhere along the line that the audit and governance meeting might be somehow curtailed or put back, or would come up perhaps at another time. But it hasn't, and by God, 300 and whatever it is pages of information, which is very detailed and exceptionally well done. So congratulations to all the staff in producing what I consider to be a first-class document. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? No, in that case then we turn to the recommendation on page 94. There are 3 recommendations, all of which are for noting. Committee members, are they noted?
Noted.
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 Thank you, everyone. Moving on then to agenda item 15 on page 144. This is the Treasury Management Annual Review. I call upon John Owen, Finance Manager, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Am I coming through loud and clear? Good.
Can hear you.
Thank you. Right, okay. Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2019-20 was approved by full council on the 27th of February 2019. It actually requires mid-year and annual reviews are reported to this committee each year. This report highlights the Treasury Management activity for the financial year of 2019-20. The main parts of the strategy were to utilise cash balances rather than to enter into loan debt to finance the capital programme due to low investment returns and reducing counterparty risk at the same time. This is until when borrowing will be required during the year. There's also consideration to further diversify the portfolio, ensuring that a combination of secured and unsecured investments are considered, and a greater use of local authority investments will be investigated for greater security. Investments at the start of the year were total £15 million. These did go up to 37 million during the year, and as at the 31st of March, they were 11,000,025. A list of these are shown in Appendix A. Average investment balance for the year was also 25 million. All investments have been short-term to be available when required, and we had greater use of money market funds due to their sort of low risk and higher yield instruments. Investment income for the year was approximately £208,000. This actually outperformed the budget. This is due to having higher levels of income for most of the year, as we didn't enter a borrowing position until a bit later. Speaking of borrowing, we did start borrowing in November 2019 to help fund property purchase within the capital programme. It was short term from local authorities, which appeared to be the best source due to accessibility and interest rates at the time. Borrowing has risen to 11 million at the end of the year, all short term with local authority funding to fund the capital programme in light of the reduced income of council tax and business rates in the year. Current rates so far this year, current loans, so far has gone down to 9 million, but however this is anticipated to increase as the year go on. We are taking steps to look at to include some longer term funding, to have a mixture of long and short term funding to balance the risks of refinancing and maybe interest rate risk, even though that's probably fairly low at the moment. All potential and treasury indicators have been complied with through the year, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Members, is there anyone who wishes to speak? Councillor Cox, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, John. One question: if we've been borrowing from local councils, do you think that that is going to actually dry up, because everybody is calling on their reserves to cover their revenue short income, and therefore where we're borrowing those for, will they be asked to have them back? Is that something, or am I getting the wrong end of the stick here?
Mr. Owen, are you happy to respond?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think you're quite right. I think local authorities at the moment are fairly cash rich. There seems to be a lot of local authority funds around at the moment due to grants being paid to local authorities. However, yes, depending how the situation goes that we're in at the moment, income levels will probably start dropping. And things like that, and it could become hard. All our loans will with local authorities are short term. I think the longest one goes out to November. And as I say, we are looking for a lot of other types of funding in the meantime to help with that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? No? In that case, then we'll turn to the recommendations on page 144. There are 2 recommendations, both of which are for noting. And members, is that agreed?
Agreed. Noted.
Noted.
Lovely.
Noted.
Thank you, everyone. Agenda item 16 is on page 154, and this is the annual accounts 2019-20. And I call upon Paul Holland, Senior Finance Manager, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. As was noted at the top of the meeting, I believe, there are representatives tonight from the Council's auditors, Grant Thornton, with us. That's Tina James and Paul Dossett. And Tina will be presenting the audit findings report after I've just finished going through the details of my report. And my colleagues, Mark Green and Ellie Dunnett, are also present this evening. So this is the Council's statement of accounts for 2019-20. Just to start with a little background, obviously due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government decided to adjust the usual deadlines for publishing and approving the accounts. The publication date was moved back from the 31st of May to the 31st of August at the latest, and the approval date was changed from the 31st of July to the 30th of November at the latest. The finance team took the view that we'd like to try and complete this exercise as close to the original deadlines we possibly could. And the auditors were very helpfully able to sort of broadly stick to the originally agreed sort of dates for their audit that we decided before this all started. So this is going to leave the finance team free to focus on the upcoming budget cycle, which is clearly going to be quite challenging now given the financial pressures the council is under. So turning to the statement itself, that consists of the following. It starts with the narrative report, and this is just a summary of the council's performance for the year. The next section is the primary statement. So this is the consolidated, comprehensive income and expenditure statement. This is kind of the equivalent of what you'd see as a profit and loss account in company accounts, but it also includes a number of non-cash items such as depreciation, for example. So the next statement, the movement in reserve statements, effectively takes these out because we're required to put that in for accounting practice, and that shows the actual balances that we held at the end of the year, split between the usable reserves, which are things like the general fund balance, earmark reserves and the capital receipts reserved, and also the unusable balances, which are mainly related to capital and pension items. That's followed by the balance sheet, which is a snapshot of the financial position at the 31st of March 2020. The cash flow statement, which is a summary of all the receipts and payments throughout the year. And then the majority of the statement is the supporting notes, which add additional information and context to the primary statements above. And the last part of the statement is the collection fund. So this is income and expenditure in relation to council tax and business rates, which represents the council's position as the billing authority in collecting revenue on behalf of other bodies. So just to highlight a few headline messages from the statement itself. There was a significant increase in the value of property, plant and equipment following the acquisition of the Lockmeadow Entertainment Complex this year. And related to that, the council entered into a borrowing position, as John mentioned in his previous report, during 2019-20, and that's reflected in the short-term borrowing of 11 million that's showing on the balance sheet. Short-term creditors have increased by 10 million, which is largely down to an increase in Section 106 monies that we've received from developers that we're currently holding and that we will pass on to other bodies at certain trigger points in the development. So this is primarily KCC and the NHS. And there was also an increase in amounts payable to central government under the collection fund arrangements for business rates. Members who attended the briefing session last month, where we presented the draft accounts, did make some suggestions to improve the presentation and clarity of the accounts, and these have now been incorporated. The statement also, or the documents you've got also include the letter of representation. This is written from the council to the external auditor and assists them in reaching their audit opinion by confirming a number of statements about the information the statement contains and the basis of the preparation that was used in putting the statements together. In terms of the audit itself, the work is substantially now complete. Although, as you may have noticed, or is referenced in the executive summary at the start of the report, there is still some uncertainty around the pension fund actuarial valuation, which needs to be resolved. This could lead to some possible changes to the accounts, and there is an outside chance these changes could be substantial, and we may need to bring the accounts back in September for approval. But either way, we will communicate the outcome of the exercise to the committee. So that's really all I've got to say at this stage. So if I could now hand over to Tina James from Grant Thornton to take you through the audit findings report. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Chair. So I think Paul's introduced obviously a lot of the information with regards to the timing and the deadlines and the way they've moved. I think the things I would just draw out, so on page 4 of our report there, we've listed some of the things that were outstanding at the time of drafting this report. As Paul has said, our work was substantially complete during July. We had a number of things outstanding. Of those, we have cleared some. The items that remain is just finishing off some work on the PPE evaluation testing, the pension fund auditor assurance and completion of some outstanding queries in that area, and then our internal review procedures and review of the final set of accounts. So we have managed to clear some of those, and it's just some of the larger things that are taking more time due to the remote way of working and the additional challenges presented. And obviously these are big areas with regards risk and levels of estimation, particularly in a year like this year. I think the other thing to draw your attention to is in our audit plan that we presented earlier in the year, it was noted that the council would be preparing group accounts. The decision was made by the council not to go ahead with that. It wasn't required on materiality basis, and with the other challenges being presented with remote working and everything else this year, it was decided that this was not the time to move towards those, and that will be reviewed, I expect, next year. And I'm happy to take any questions on the rest of the report.
Thank you very much. Members, is there anyone who wishes to speak on this item? No?
Yes, Chair, can I have a quick word?
Yes, could I as well? Sorry, I couldn't get on the machine.
No, I was listening to the report. I didn't actually write anything in IM. It's not on the actual report itself, but page 157 about Power 2.7. We know we've purchased Lock Meadow Complex, which has put up the value of our holdings. Now, I would like reassurance that we look at the values of our property every year and ensure adequately. And the reason I'm saying this is because we all know what's happened at Grenfell Tower. When their claim was paid out, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea received only £24.5 million for the tower. They should have insured it for £50 million. So that's double what they actually got. So I'd like to ensure that we do actually insure for the full amount of our property and not do some sort of penny pinching exercise, which in the end costs us money. So I'd like some sort of assurance on that, please.
Mr. Owen, is that one for you?
Yes, could I? Sorry. Yeah, could you go on, please.
Sorry, yeah, I can. Yes, I don't believe that all properties are revalued every year. I believe they're on a cycle, and the cycle is on the same cycle as we do the accounts. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'll just get a list of what we do for the accounts, and then we do the insurance valuation on the same basis. So they are done very regularly. They're all indexed as well. On the years that they're not valued, they're actually indexed by a percentage that our insurers provide for us. To keep in line with inflation and building costs and things like that. So they should be sort of fairly up to date.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, did you also want to come in here?
Yes, just to clarify the frequency of the valuation. So we are required to value all our properties at least once every 5 years. What we tend to do with our higher value properties is we tend to get them done every 2 years now, so they are fairly up to date. So and obviously that we also get the insurance values done at the same time, as John had mentioned previously. So.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm quite reassured by that. So yes, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Perry, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of points. On page, was the opening paragraph on your report, page 154, you talk about unqualified audit opinion that you think that's going to be the intention. Then it says, however, it's anticipated that the opinion of this year will include an emphasis of matter paragraph. What is an emphasis of matter and what's its status? That's my first question. The second question I've got is on the audit report itself, where you go into the significant findings going concern. At the very bottom, the concluding comments, you have, it says our work is ongoing as we wait updated cash flow forecast to reflect the expected COVID-19 impact and mitigation actions. So I suppose my question is, how can you say that it's likely to be unqualified when there's a major issue regarding future cash flows or cash flows as a respect of in respect of COVID? I'm slightly worried. I know this is the accounts, for the previous year, but this is obviously an issue, and I'd like a bit more of an explanation on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I pick that up, and Tina can come in with any additional points. So Paul Dossett, I'm the partner on the audit. So your first,
right. Thank you.
Yeah. On the first question, the emphasis of matter. So the emphasis of matter is not a qualification. What we do with the emphasis of matter is draw attention to disclosures in the council's accounts in this particular case, in respect of material uncertainty about asset valuations. That's part of the valuer's report to the council. This is something we see at all. This is across the whole of local government. So we have this disclosure in all accounts, and this emphasis of matter in all accounts. So it's not a qualification. It merely draws attention to something that's significant and material in the accounts, i.e. the material uncertainty over assets. Ongoing concern, I think there's two things. First of all, in the public sector, councils, other public bodies are always valued on a carrying basis. So, for example, in the private sector, if an audit organisation wasn't a going concern or had going concern issues, there may be different methods of valuing that organisation. So we don't change when we look at going concern for accounts. We don't change the method of valuing or the consideration of the value of the council. Second point about that, we do in terms of cash flows. The regulator of audit for all commercial audits, quite understandably, has said to auditors, you need to look at going concern in a big way. So you need to look at cash flow forecasts, etc., etc. So we're currently doing that in respect to Maidstone. We've had some very detailed cash flow forecasts for the next 2 to 3 years, and that reflects what the council's approach to that is. And the council, obviously, being a public body and having quite wide powers to borrow, can obviously has a cash flow issues to manage in terms of its own income and expenditure, and there have been some challenges due to COVID in respect of preset monies and monies you've had to pay to other bodies. But it also has the facility to borrow money from PWLB or from other councils quite easily. It's a relatively straightforward process, and so that puts the council's cash position in a relatively strong place to be able to be a going concern from a cash point of view. So we focused on it this year because the regulatory requirements of auditors in all sectors focus on that, but it's not a matter of concern to us because the council's been able to demonstrate to us what its forecasts are and how it's dealing with any gaps in that forecast in terms of its capacity to take out loans. So it's a matter we're drawing to the committee's attention, but we don't see it as a concern.
Thank you very much. That's very comprehensive. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chairman.
Next up, Councillor Cooling.
Yes, thank you very much. For the moment, I've lost the will to live on performance materiality, and I suspect John Perry would agree with me on that. And on page 174, where you say your work is substantially complete, you've covered that substantially. But the third bullet is about the Kent Pension Fund, etc. And on page 169, there's a bullet that you've undertaken work to assess the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of the actuary, etc. May we hear your assurance on this meeting that you are confident that that actuary knows his or her job? And then a couple of details, if I may. I think when we discussed this a month ago, we did raise a comment that it looked odd that the chief executive's salary had jumped percentage-wise a lot more than the directors. I don't think that's going to be reassuring. The table on page 235, there may need to be another comment on that to explain why. And an absolute detail, the top of 237, the table there, I think there's one of the digits is wrong. But I think that my final question is on page 231, where you have the reserves, planning appeals reserves of 286k. I'm assuming that the known appeals appear in some other part of the accounts as an estimated actual cost. So those are my observations and questions.
So I think that there's a combination of questions, some of which are absolutely for us, and some of which are probably for Paul to pick up. Paul Holland, I don't know. Shall I start with the pension fund, because that's definitely the ones related to us. So in terms of the pension fund, it's quite a complicated. It's quite a complicated area, the pension fund, because the council obviously relies on the actuarial assessment that's reflected in your accounts, and obviously we audit that number. And that actuarial assessment has been based on the updated valuation following the triennial revaluation for 1st of April 19. So there's a number of aspects of that we need to look into. We have further complications over the asset position in the light of COVID and the valuation of assets in the pension fund. We have further complications over McLeod because there's further updates to the McLeod judgment. We have further complications over a couple of other schemes that are yet to come to fruition. One is the Godwin scheme. Anyway, there's a lot of issues around pensions that we're currently working through, and there's one we're looking at the moment about experience, which is essentially about the movement in members, the profile of members between the 2016 valuation and the 2019 valuation. So there's a lot of complicated things, and sorting all of those out in the next few weeks will be paramount for us. And a lot of that does involve us engaging with the actuary, and also, not when I say us as a team, but also the National Audit Office and PwC, who the National Audit Office use to take an overall assessment of the actuaries. So what we do in terms of your specific question about the actuaries, the actuarial firms who provide services to local government pension scheme are also subject to a detailed assessment by PwC, and they're contracted by the National Audit Office to do that work. And PwC provide us and all the other audit firms with a detailed analysis of those particular actuaries and their competence to do the work. And then PwC provide us as the local auditor with a series of detailed questions that we need to ask in a local context, which is obviously what we do. So it's a very complex and technical area, but in very broad terms, we're confident in the technical competence of the actuary, but we just recognise there's a huge number of complications, and at the moment it feels very complicated because of all these schemes that are being heard by various parts of the judicial system, all of which have an impact on the local government pension scheme, that sometimes it's quite difficult to assess precisely what that impact is and when that impact will land. But we will be reporting all of that back to the next meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Dunnett, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to respond on the question about the planning appeals. So we have set aside as a provision 261,000, which is a specific provision against known appeals that were ongoing at the year end. So I think there's a list of 6 cases where we've estimated and provided. The amount that's in the earmarked reserve is a general, it's not a provision, but it's a general amount we set aside to take into account the risk that there might be future appeals relating to planning that we don't know about yet. So hopefully that clears that point up. Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, does that answer all your questions?
I believe so. Well, I had the observation about, I do think the chief executive's salary, which I'm not objecting to, warrants a comment. Otherwise, there may be some unkinder questions that are asked. But apart from that, fine.
That is noted, thank you. We will include the comment about the chief executive's salary, which I believe was relating to her returning officer pay rather than a sort of general pay increase.
Thank you. Councillor Titchener.
Madam Chairman, first of all, I would just like to say that I'm delighted that people are looking at the complications about the pensions. I fully understand that the complications are pretty horrendous given all the variables, but I'm glad it's been looked at. There's one particular point I wanted to raise, actually on page 179, when it says the impact of COVID-19, loss of revenue, car parking, reduced levels of council tax, business rates, and I see that the finance team has come up with a net impact of 0.45 million in increased expenditure and reductions in income after taking into account the support provided by central government. This 6.45 million, it looks quite small to me, but I would like to know if the council is going to look at, shall we say, an optimistic scenario and a pessimistic scenario so that the two can be seen side by side. I'm not sure if this is an optimistic figure of the 6.45 million or whether it's a pessimistic one, but it'd be quite useful. Like in any business, it's always good to see, what the two options might be so one can plan for the elephant traps if they appear. That's just an observation.
Thank you.
I can respond on that one if you like. So the 6.45 million was a product of financial information we've been asked to provide to central government in relation to our expected impact of COVID-19. So that, if you like, was probably our best guess. We are, as you suggest, modelling optimistic and more pessimistic scenarios as part of our medium-term financial planning. So they'll come through in our kind of more detailed strategic revenue projections. But the figures that we include in the report are what we've been reporting to the government, and they don't ask for the other two options which you referred to.
Good. Thank you.
Members, does anyone else have any questions? No? In that case, then we'll turn to the recommendations on page 154. There are 3 recommendations. The first is for noting and the second 2 are for approval. Members, are they all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to the final agenda item, so agenda item 17. This is the Budget Strategy Risk Assessment Update. I call upon Mark Green, Director of Finance and Business Improvement, to introduce his report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. The report that you've got in front of you is the one that we bring to the committee every time, updating on the budget risks that the council faces. And of course, the massive issue that we face now is the impact of COVID-19, and it follows on quite neatly from the question that Councillor Titchener raised just now about the accounts. And the report alludes to the fact that for the new financial year, we do face a very substantial deficit. And this was reported to Policy and Resources Committee last week, and a proposal was agreed for how we address that, which is basically drawing on reserves because the support we get from government isn't sufficient to cover the deficit. And that will leave us on current estimates anyway with unallocated general fund reserves of just over 4 million. So we are vulnerable if, for example, there's a resurgence of COVID-19, and so one of the things that we'll be looking at over the next few months is whether the current minimum level of reserves that the council specifies of 2 million needs to be reviewed, given that we do face a very different risk climate now. On the specifics about the risk register, this is addressed both in the budget risk register that is in this report and in the corporate risk register. And of course, COVID-19 has really brought home to us at a corporate level the fact that we do need to acknowledge that there will be pandemics, a whole range of things that maybe we didn't take account of fully in our risk management previously. And specifically, so far as the budget risk register is concerned, what you're seeing here is that the single biggest risk that we're now identifying as threatening the future budget position is a resurgence of COVID-19. The various other risks that we've reported in previous iterations of this risk register, in many cases the risks are heightened. Clearly, fees and charges that the council collects depend very much on the overall health of the economy. So the risk of fees and charges falling short of budget is greater. And we've captured in this report on page 300 a financial quantification of the risks, which I know Councillor Cooling asked us to do before in a bar chart form. And this is it's a pretty crude way of looking at it, but I think it highlights the type of risks that we have and the financial impact. So I hope this presents clearly to members what we see as the budget risks that we face, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on the report.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Councillor Perry, you got straight in there. Did you want to ask a question?
Thank you. That's very well spotted. Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to go to the matrix, which is what always interests me anyway. This is on page 298. And I think what's worried me, I mean, the financial impact from resurgence of COVID-19, I expected to be in the top right-hand corner. But what actually really worries me, there are a lot of what I would call medium amber type risks. There's a whole raft of them, which could well and truly happen and could end up with us in the actual much more severe risk area. They seem to be all on the edge. I mean, for instance, like planned savings are not delivered, and we know that that's going to be quite a challenge in the new year. Inflation rates, we don't really know. Council tax increases. There's a whole variety here. If we don't get it right, could end up in a much more high risk, dare I say it, or even black risk category. They're right on the edge. And I'd just like to get your comments on that, Mark. What do you think? Because, we are in uncharted territory here, and I do realise that. And it's not easy. But I'd be interested in your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, shall I come back on that, Madam Chair? I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Perry, that we do face a whole range of different risks, and that's part of the challenge now. It's not just one thing. There's a whole lot of things that could hit us, and you'll be familiar with the way we're projecting the future financial performance of the council in our reporting on the medium-term financial strategy. Funnily enough, it's similar to what Councillor Titchener mentioned earlier. We do look at different scenarios, favourable, neutral and adverse, to try and take account of the worst possible situation that we could face. So yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of risks, and we are looking to reflect that in our financial planning.
Thank you. Councillor Perry, do you want to come back on any of that?
No, just to thank Mark. I mean, I think we're all working together on this, and clearly it's a stage-by-stage process, isn't it? We'll be monitoring it carefully, watching it, and revising our estimates and forecasts as we go along, I suspect. But it's a critical time for us all. But thank you, Mark, for that. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooling, did you want to come in here?
Yes, please. On page 296, Mark, paragraph 2.9, you do note that a number of projects are deferred. But I would ask the perhaps obvious question: if those individual projects, or those projects individually, stand and justify themselves in terms of capital requirement, interest to finance, and then savings or revenue coming in, it might be a pity to defer, given I'm assuming that at the moment raising capital is not exactly a huge challenge at a huge cost. So 2.9, I would hope that we're not just pruning projects for the sake of it to feel good. Some of them might be absolutely justified despite the current situation. So that's an observation. Secondly, Mark, I'm guessing, and the matrix, and thank you very much indeed for the sort of horizontal bar chart you give. But I'm guessing the strategy risks are judged against one of the scenarios, and I'm guessing they're judged against the neutral scenario.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, in which case I haven't got on my eyelids what you've assumed for risk B, L and J, but have you, in that even that neutral scenario, have you assumed a pessimistic enough case that would actually say B, L and J as risks are shown as too high in this matrix? So that's a question. But I must say that the bar chart it's all made up, and I think, as Councillor Delia said, it's all crystal ball. Well, it's your crystal ball, Mark. It's probably better than ours, and it actually is an endeavour to give relativity to the risks, and I think it's an excellent illustration. It's wrong, but it gives an illustration of where to concentrate. And my final observation, in the matrix above on page 299, or the table I should say, where you get the financial impact and the likelihoods. I mean, I would rather see, if it were me, that the financial impact from a resurgence of COVID-19, presumably localized in Maidstone, is in fact far higher potentially than you're showing, but the probability, the likelihood, far lower. So I'm not disputing where it ends up in the horizontal bar chart, but I would hope there's not a 75% probability, and I personally don't judge it to be a 75% probability, but if it happens, I think the figures you show, 250, 750 and 500, would be far too low. So The balance may still come out as a weighted 375, but I think it's a different seesaw between the probability and the risk. So just observations, but I think it does stimulate thinking, and it's wrong, but it's far better than nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we've got Councillor Daly.
Yes, well, Chairman, I have already noted that, we all need crystal ball to look into these things and to get some sort of sense out of it. I've pointed out in this committee more than once that our future projections based on inflation alone are subject to overhaul, I think. Sometimes I think they've been very, very low, and I think probably too low. But if we think we've got problems, what do you think the Exchequer is going through at the moment? Because of the number of things which are so unpredictable at the moment. And in various other meetings, we talk about if COVID is coming back. I can guarantee that it's going to be when COVID comes back, and we've got absolutely no idea whether it's going to come back in a greater or a lesser degree than it currently is. Not only that, it might come in coincidentally with another pandemic, the problem of flu in September, October, November time. We just don't know these things. So what I'm suggesting, on page, as has been pointed out, on page 296, it is saying that a lot of these factors which we used to just ignore, we are now bringing into view, and we're looking at it. You can't predict, but I think we have to predict worse rather than less. So, and the other thing, of course, that's going to hit us probably January coming next, Brexit. We've got no idea where we are with that. And that may very well hit us very, very hard if we don't get a decent deal. And we may very well get, we don't want to go to the political route on this, but it may very well be that we are already beginning to see the problems that we're going to get with Brexit, whether we get a deal or we don't. I would suspect it's going to be pretty hard, but we're going to be in the same boat as many. We're not just being singled out. We are making as many predictions as we can possibly make, bearing in mind our crystal ball is not entirely clear, but neither is it completely faded out altogether. Whilst we've got these risks on our schedule, and we know jolly well that as long as we jump on them as they happen and try and make adjustments, I think we should be okay. But you can't do more than you are already doing. This is my attitude to the whole business here. We are being as prudent, I think is the right word, as possibly we can be in our situation. So don't let's get despondent about it, but let's be realistic. But let's go for worse, I think, rather than for better, so that we don't get caught with our trousers round our ankles. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, did you want to come in?
Right now I have so many pictures that people have put forward of the mists clearing and crystal balls and trousers round ankles. All I really want to say is I think we have seen, be it us distributing grant money, us looking at our budgets, us being prepared for things. I can only say, and if I was talking to every resident we have, we are being as cautious yet optimistic as we can. We are not going to shut down. We need to carry on. We need to carry on carefully. And so investments are important. Investments in capital things are important to us, because this will end one way or the other. That we will come out of this. And I was going to ask a question. We see here that K is that the increased complexity of government regulation. Well, I think that should be at the top right-hand side of that, because, I mean, we cannot, and Mark, I've sat next to you up in London and gone, what is going to come out of this today? I think that there could be things that we can't even plan for. We could be talking about government regulations that we don't even exist anymore. So there are so many different things we should look at. I'm always one for creating a picture out of what we see. I just want people to know that we are open for business as a borough, but we have the right tools in our box. We have the right ammunition behind us. And the officers that you see talking to us at this committee, please be aware and know that we are watching every minute. I don't know how Mark sleeps, but you can see he sits in his window and looks at his crystal ball. But thank you to all of the staff, because it's only by this sort of documentation that we know that we are aware, and that's day by day, and we have to look at that in this sort of microcosm. It is happening day by day, month by month. We will be prepared. That's all I can really say. But thank you for all the work you're doing to make us prepared. And also thank you to the two Peters for bringing things to our attention and making us aware that there are other people that do understand what's going on, because there are so many residents that do not see even the bottom line. But I think it's important of your input and how you can go back out to the parishes and making them aware of what we're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, is there anyone else who wishes to speak? No? In that case, then we turn to the recommendations on page 292. There's one recommendation, and that is to note. Members, is this report noted?
Noted.
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 Thank you, everyone. In that case, then, that's the end of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. And we've made it for our first virtual meeting. I will see you all in September.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you all.
Well done, Chairman.